Welcome to Drawing with Freehand Lines. Today we'll be taking a look at how you might set up a drawing. Drawing can be very many different styles. Some drawings can be quite loose, others can be quite tight in terms of the line layout, and you will notice that I previously produced a video on this subject about how you draw different styles of lines. One thing's for sure though, when you're designing a building or drawing a building, you do need to get the proportions right. So there are different ways of getting the proportion right. You can sketch by eye, and that takes practice, and everyone will gain that over time. And it's well worth doing, because when you sketch by eye, you begin to learn more eye-hand coordination. People report being able to understand things a bit better and how things work. But if you're looking for a way to actually set up drawings in a way that can kind of make that progression easier, this is not a bad way to start. So I'm going to show you a few tips here in how to set up a basic perspective drawing. And to do this, what I've done is I've got some paper, some watercolor paper, some watercolor later, a ruler or two rulers, and I've actually got two printouts of the building we're going to draw. A simple Georgian building that will work really well, I think, at the size we want it on the drawing. So first of all, this is kind of printed out. So I've taken two printouts here, one colour, so I know what the colours are, the other's black and white. And we're going to use these to help us create the perspective. You don't need to use a printout. The same principle can be done actually by using it by hand and actually looking at the building by eye. But this is just a way of helping, I think, to create that perfect shot. So let's get into it. So the first thing we want to do is to position this where you want it on the drawing, and I'm going to use some soft pencils to do this work. Generally you'd use very hard pencils. Hard pencils will leave less of a mark and easy to rub out, particularly after you put the pen on. Remember that we'll be using pencil to create the structure, and then once we've got the structure, we can use pen to fill in the details. But getting the structure really helps that process along. So the first thing we'll do is position this. So I'm just going to make a line here, 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 and here. That just helps me position where that drawing is going to be. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tape that drawing down. So use masking tape when you can. Masking tape is really good because it will come off the paper without causing any damage. And so that's taped down as such. And the first thing we're going to do when you see a building is that you never see a building full on, it's never perfectly square. It's always in perspective, and that perspective usually goes up, but will definitely be perspective of this on the west and the east directions. So the image I've chosen here is a simple image for the purposes of this process, but also what's really useful about this image is that it's kind of almost parallax. That means the lines going up and down are more or less straight. They don't need to be straight, but for the purposes of this presentation, I think it's a really useful way of starting. So that's the way we're starting, and this is the image we're going to do. I'm going to place this out of the way. So the first thing to do in perspective is, when you've got an east to west, is you need to find out the vanishing point. Now, if a building's on a corner, it will have two vanishing points. So I'll just show you what I mean. A piece of paper. So this building has one vanishing point. So it has a vanishing point like this. It's a building that actually is like that in its form. And its vanishing point will be over here. Those lines will converge to a point, and that point, when we put across, will be the actual eye line height of the person who is actually looking at the painting. Now, a two-point perspective would be if this building was on a corner. Like that. And then you would have a point perspective here and a point perspective here. And those would align again through the middle straight, and that would be the eye line. That will be the actual position that the person's looked at it or taken a photo in this case. And that's what we'll be doing today. So the first thing to do is establish our vanishing point. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to take the the highest, straightest line we can. In here we've got the string course. We're going to take the string course and a heavy pen, and we're going to pencil in right across like that, going beyond the paper there and down to the bottom there. Dark enough, maybe make that a bit darker. Use a heavier pencil. So it's always tricky to get these right because you're relying on a little bit of line there, but believe me, getting it even approximately right will help enormously. So there's that line there. And then we go to another line and you hit the ground floor plane. And we do that again. And this one needs to extend a little bit. Extend it a little bit until it gives us a vanishing point. And I'm going to assume that vanishing point is around about there because this vanishing point is actually going off the camera. But that gives us an idea. Once we've got that vanishing point, all the lines in this plane will match. If you see that, they all match. And that's what we'll use to set up our drawing. So we'll start by taking this here and going like that. This side of the painting, that side of the painting. We'll do the top of the head of the window as well. Head of the window as well. Bottom of the window like that. Like that. That. And like that, picking up all the horizontals that we are interested in. Like so. That works like that. So that's given us our structure. I think we should do the roof actually, if I forget. Get the roof up there. And that's given our structure like that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to place this building just next to this one. And I'm going to take that down. Then I'm going to pull this up and align this to the two lines there. And what you can see is now we have kind of almost a matrix. We've got the horizontal and we've got the vertical. And this is the way I'm going to pull these things together to create something amazing. So, taking these lines now, we can just actually join these lines together. There's our roof. There's our parapet, our string course, bottom of the window, Now what I can do with this is if I take the horizontal like that, this tells me where those lines are. So for example, that line there is actually the bottom of the window in that position. So I've got that. So what I'm going to do is once I've got these lines together, I'm going to use that as a grid to help me start to pull in all the gaps. Missed that one a bit, so I'll take that down there, And I'm going to take this one here. I'm going to take this one here, like that. Fantastic. Now, so what we can do now is we want our verticals. So we're going to put this vertical here, and this is where the edge of the building is. I'm going to put that down there. And I'm going to put the other edge of the building, and that's down here. So you keep that vertical. These things are quite useful because these have got lines on, so I can align them to the painting as much as possible. But generally, you can kind of get this more or less right. It's not a precious thing. And that's actually the building and the horizontal lines. Now we can actually start to have fun with the actual placing the windows in position now. So the windows now, we can take this one again, using the horizontal lines. We can do it this way, or we can do it that way. So, and that will give us where we need the windows to be. So this is the window here. So window, window, window. So that position, actually, I've missed that line off. And then that's the base. And then window in this position. And window, 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 window. And being you don't need to be precise. You're kind of just getting it more or less correct. This is not a technical drawing, which is where I learned all these techniques. This is a piece of art. So what we're doing is if we get the big bits right, the small details, they always give you a little bit more flex. Something like that, and we can just double check. Yeah, that's the line going through, and that's the line I'm missing, which is the actual bottom of the window there. So that goes through like that, and that's where the windows end. Then underneath that, the head of the window is here, so that's right there. And that really gives us the basics for our facade. So you can, of course, then say, well, I'm going to put the tops of the windows on as well. These are windows at the roof level. And you can use this technique just a little bit off that one to just create the grid you need, and then you can add stuff in. You can actually start to put more detail in as you need. We can even get the chimneys on. Chimney like this. Like that. I want to know the height of it. I can approximate that by doing this. And like that. And I can guesstimate that bit. And then I can see that this is approximately this height. So you don't need to use all this stuff. And then you can start to actually work out the details you want to. So for example, this has a header. It has a sill. You have the reveal of the window, not much. And you then have in between that, the mullions, just like a sharper pencil. Of course, at this stage, usually I would just do this straighten pen because I've created the space. I know I've created the general layout. I've got the grid of the facade. It's generally quite straightforward from this point on. You've got the string course in that location. String course. Oh, sorry, that's in the wrong place. String course in this location up here. That. And then you continue down as you would, just filling in all that lovely detail. And that's a way you can kind of start to create these fantastic watercolours, which are very, very detailed and accurate. And what we've done effectively is just really kind of created the grid, the framework, the big moves, if you want, so you can actually then get the proportions right, and your drawing will not go far wrong from that. So it's a really useful technique and can be used on site, can be used as you sketch normally. You don't need to be doing it off printouts, but it is a really good way to train. And onwards, so, and the window and the door down here, we see it's a bit wider, comes down to a curve and then comes down like that, etc, etc. And there's also lines in the facade here, which you can just fill in using these as a guide. That one goes down there, etc. And you can very quickly start to work out what all these things as they go together. And then of course we've got the balcony on the Piano Nobile. This is the Piano Nobile, the first floor, where the main rooms, the house. And then of course we've got the general front. Just doing this very quickly just to give you an idea of how this can work out. Now, once you've got that, it's you can see it's a very simple thing to actually start to pen in over the top of this. And for the pens, you generally use a pen like this. So this is a fine liner, and it depends on the thickness you want to use. This is a very thin one, but effectively, if I was to do this over here now, draw this in as it is, and then rub that out. What you'll see is the fine liner stays in position with detail, and have a watercolour on top of that, the ink will stay there. So that gives a really good idea, I think, of how you might be able to set up a grid and start to produce some detailed drawings. Check out my other videos that show how to draw lines and straight lines, and stay tuned. Thank you.